Hello everyone, we've got a lot to talk about now. Before I start on the main topic of this video, I just want to comment on the previous videos, just a little funny joke about Alex Jones' meltdown about the drone attack on Russian strategic bombers. It's a little amusing video, at least I hope. I didn't add any commentary to it, so I'm just going to do that now. First of all, I want to say something positive about one of my enemies before I lay into them. If you haven't seen Alex Jones in like the past couple years or so, you probably haven't seen how much he's changed. He used to be kind of like a round, roly-poly sort of guy. He was getting like that girl in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory who turns into a blueberry, remember? But lately he's looking a lot slimmer. He's looking much better shape than he was before. And I think it's because he's on that Ozempic. Now, I'm not going to judge. I mean, do what works for you, right? But I will say one thing is kind of funny. You ever notice how guys like Alex Jones, when there's a drug or medicine that actually helps them in some way or just gives them some result they want, suddenly they're not worried about big pharma and the Illuminati trying to poison them, right? So, he'll say that the vaccines are part of some Microsoft-run population control experiment, but Ozempic gets him the results he wants, so he's not afraid that it's secretly containing chemicals that will change his gender or something that'll make him into Alexandra Jones. Same thing with those supplements that he's always selling. Supplements in the US are pretty much completely unregulated, but don't worry, that's not going to poison you or anything. And it's the same with all these other guys like Jones. Like when they're taking the human growth hormone, steroids, whatever, they're no longer worried that it might be secretly tainted because it's part of some government mind control program. Now, I'm not going to say a lot about Alex Jones because the guy is a clown who made a lot of money off of dead children and other tragedies. But I will say this, looking back, I think the moment when I should have realized that my country, the United States, is pretty much screwed is when I realized around like 2015 or so that this guy had basically become mainstream. See, in the early 2000s, Alex Jones was mainly like pushing the 9/11 truther stuff. But he was the type of guy where you'd only hear about him on fringe forums or at gun shows, or some homeless guy would start ranting about Alex Jones and government conspiracies and everything. It wasn't really like mainstream. If anybody normal would ever listen to him, it was just kind of like, hey, listen to this funny, wacky guy, right? And like I said, by the 2016 election cycle, this guy's suddenly mainstream. Like, people actually listen to this guy. And I'll tell you what I think a lot of the people who listen to him and buy into this stuff will say to you if you bring up the nonsense he says. Because there's entire compilations on YouTube of Alex Jones making all kinds of predictions nonstop that just never come true. And there's plenty of examples of him just pulling claims out of his ass with zero evidence whatsoever. But it's the type of thing where if you bring this up to some people, they'll say something like, oh no, bro, like I know he says some stuff that's out there sometimes, but like some of it, you got to admit, makes sense, No, you don't have to admit that. Alex Jones is completely full of shit. He's a con man. And they'll say stuff like, oh, you believe everything the government says? No, I do not believe everything the government says, especially the current government. But I don't believe a goddamn thing that Alex Jones has to say, because he is a con man. We got people who are grown adults listening to this crap. Same thing with Joe Rogan. Grown adults listening to stuff and saying like, oh, what's the government hiding about aliens, man? If you are older than 15, you should not be thinking about aliens. You need to pick up a book on physics or space exploration. You need to start listening to Carl Sagan. You need to learn about this thing called the speed of light. That's how he would pronounce it. He called it the cosmic speed limit. There's a reason for that. If you understand Einstein's theory of relativity, even on a basic level, you'll understand why you shouldn't be sitting around waiting for aliens to visit. Of course, with Jones, it's not limited to aliens. Like, this guy has called people trans-dimensional demons, literal demons. Like, yeah, man, Warhammer 40K is real. Yeah, sure. When you look at a lot of stuff this guy says and how he became sort of mainstream, you realize why this guy has been boosted and promoted so much by Russian state media, and he basically pays them back every chance he can get. Because, see, over in Russia, this fellow named Alexander Dugin had this idea that conspiracy theories are kind of like religion in the sense that you can't really prove them false or true, but they motivate people to believe certain things and potentially do certain things, right? And that's why Russian state media, I'm not saying it's all Dugin's fault, because there are other people more influential than Dugin that basically agree with this general idea about conspiracy theories. But basically, what they promote is what I would call unreality, okay? Believing in conspiracy theories is something that anyone can be susceptible to. Anyone can fall for them at one time or another. But unreality is this state where everything is a conspiracy. Nothing is as it seems. That's why you see idiots on social media saying stuff like, oh, look at this footage from a natural disaster. This doesn't look right. What's going on here? This looks fishy. Or the people who say stuff like, why don't we see any combat footage of the war in Ukraine? The most recorded war in history to date. That is living in a state of unreality. And for any kind of aspiring dictator, this is what you want to have people doing. The mistakes of dictators in the past is that they all had some kind of scientific ideology and they would try to impose this on everyone in society. But that can cause all kinds of problems because you have to either convince people or just force them to act like they believe. It's a lot better, and this is something that the Kremlin recognized a long time ago. It is much better if you get people to believe in nothing. You want people to just not know what's real. You want them to question everything but never be able to come up with an answer, because that makes them more docile. Even if they think they're a dissident, they're opposing the system, they're really not, because nobody can really say what's real. And if you want to understand another way conspiracy theories are so dangerous, especially if you want to try to improve your society, next time somebody is preaching all these conspiracy theories to you, it doesn't really matter what theory it is, but let's just say, for sake of argument, it's 9/11. You can listen to most of their spiel, all the claims they make, the ones that were debunked like 20 years ago, and then just ask them like, wow, man, like that's diabolical. The government did this false flag attack and killed 3,000 of its own people. All right, like, I'm ready to do something about this. What do we do about this? What do we do? How do we get justice? And I guarantee you what's going to happen in most cases is they're going to go all deer in headlights, and the most they can come up with is something like, you got to spread the word, you got to wake people up. As though people in 2025 have never heard any of these 9/11 conspiracy theories, right? Like, when are they supposed to wake up? There's actually a lot of people who, to some extent or another, believe someone's lying about 9/11, right? What has it done? What has it changed? And it pretty much works this way with any major conspiracy theory. It's just, you listen to this whole spiel and then you say, okay, well, what do we do about it? How we stop these Illuminati or whatever it is, right? So it's all just nonsense. Jones is a con man. I'm not even going to call him an idiot. I think he doesn't really believe. I don't know to what extent he believes in anything. That man got rich off of just telling nonstop bullshit lies. And if even a tiny fraction of what he said about the alleged powers that be were true, they would have taken him out. Why let this guy live? Why let this guy become a multi-millionaire for years? And the worst that happens to him is a lawsuit that he bungles himself. If you ever look into that lawsuit, it's actually quite funny how he basically just shot himself in the foot. So, sorry to rant so much about Alex Jones, just that I didn't have any commentary in the last video that was about him. Also, that whole segment was basically paid content for my new sponsor. They are the Illuminati. All right, so here's what I wanted to actually talk about today. I've had one of these last straw type moments. For the past year or so, there has been a sort of almost regular occurrence, almost like clockwork. It happens maybe once every 2 months, maybe even more frequently on Twitter. If you follow the conflict on Twitter, first of all, God help you. But if you do, you see a lot of drone footage, obviously, and a lot of it is FPV drone footage, because in case you don't know this, with FPVs in the field, we need to record at the very least the hits. That is usually to send to our command just so they have an idea what happened, because even if something goes wrong, we want to know what happened. The pilot can record the video if they're using goggles. There's an internal memory card they can use. Or the co-pilot navigator can record the video because there'll always be a monitor. Sometimes it's small, other times there's a bigger monitor. Sometimes the pilot's not using goggles and we just both look at the monitor. And if you are the co-pilot navigator, one of your duties is to go and record the monitor when the pilot's ready to actually go in for the attack. So in my case, for example, I often worked as the co-pilot navigator, so I have tons of videos of us hitting or not hitting various targets. And one thing I like to do most of the time is if we had the recon drone stream on the target at the time, I like to record the hit and then you just swing over to the laptop and you get to see it from the outside. That's very important too, because if you actually did hit it and you got a detonation and everything, that's pretty much the best confirmation you're going to get. Now, what happens unusually frequently on Twitter, and it's always certain types of accounts, I'll get into that later. Every once in a while, you get a situation where an FPV basically, you could say, kind of corners a Russian soldier in an open area, usually on a road, or maybe it's a open field or something like that, so there's no cover, no concealment for them. And the drone might start chasing them or circling them or something like that. I can assure you nobody does that for fun. They're doing that for a very good reason. But what inevitably happens is they see a Russian soldier get killed by one of these drones, and the video kind of goes viral. One thing I noticed about a lot of these videos is that they often do not have the insignia of the units that carried them out, which is what you usually see when units, like, for example, all of my footage, if the unit wanted to use some of that, then they would put it in a montage and put their watermark on it. But that in itself doesn't mean anything because lots of these videos just get posted on various Telegram channels anyway. But what happens is people post these videos, and it usually tends to be certain accounts. The accounts are often like American vet bros, some real, some possibly fake. Others tend to be those sort of right-wing accounts which talk a lot about warrior values and, you know, the ones that post memes like good men create good times creates weak men create hard times. You know what I mean? It's that stupid meme that goes around Twitter a lot. And they tend to have an avatar that's like a Roman statue or maybe some Viking warrior or some nonsense like that. And in these videos, basically what they will try to do is say that this is a war crime, that, well, this soldier can't do anything, or this soldier doesn't have a weapon, because sometimes people drop their weapon. And they go and they call it a war crime, and then they lament about what hell war is, even if they've never been in a war in their entire life and maybe possibly never even served in the military. And sometimes the comment is just something like, this is so depressing, so bleak. And other times they often say, like, what's this poor Russian conscript who had no choice and no say in this war? What has he done to deserve this? And then the replies are full of basically mostly wannabes and fakes, and they are all screaming and making even dumber comments. Lately, on the latest video, the one that really kind of prompted this, a lot of these wannabe tough guys were making all sorts of graphic threats about what they would do to drone pilots and their families. And I thought, man, you do not really know FPV crews in Ukraine, okay? Because, yeah, there are examples of that stereotype 20-year-old gamer nerd working as an FPV pilot, but one thing you have to remember is that nerd, and I kind of worked with one of these guys, the one that I worked with took out a main battle tank, several armored vehicles, buggies, motorcycles or ATVs, and God knows how many infantrymen. But those are usually the guys who started out their service as FPV pilots, like they joined the military relatively recently in the war. A lot of us started out in infantry or recon, and over time we got into drones because it's really the smart thing to do. The smart thing to do is minimize your risk, maximize your lethality. And I could tell you in terms of lethality, very shortly after I deployed as an FPV pilot last summer, I got a lot more lethal. And I can tell you from the drone crews that I worked with, as well as other drone crews that I've either been in touch with or just am aware of, you don't want to make threats against these people. I told one of these guys making threats about drone pilots, I said, look, I'm here in Kyiv if you want to speak. And hey, if I'm not impressive enough for you, I would be happy to introduce you to some FPV crews and I will translate all your threats for them. And then, just to be extra generous, I will make sure your remains are recovered by the U.S. Embassy so they can be shipped home for burial. But put a pin in that because we'll get back to that later, because I have some theories about why people come up with these fantasies and some misconceptions they have about drones in this war, which cause them to get so enraged at drone pilots. So the most recent video that prompted this, and I'm not going to show it on here, and I'm probably not going to put any other drone footage on here, at least for now in this video, because I want to stay monetized, thank you. This is a side gig, right? If you want more exclusive videos, I am putting those on my Patreon page for my patrons, and link in the description below, right? But in this particular video, I'm sure a lot of people who follow me either here or on Twitter know about this. Basically, an FPV drone approaches very close to a Russian soldier who is just kind of crouched there, sort of sitting in a fetal position in an open field somewhere. And the drone got exceptionally low and had very good video, so that tells me these guys have a very good setup. Because most of the time I was there with the setup that my crew had, there's no way we'd get that low without losing video. But he's just sort of crouching there, and the drone sort of checks him out for a bit. Personally, I think he's trying to figure out, is this guy already dead or something? But then he goes and just rams right into his head, and that would be basically an instant death. And so, of course, the first thing is, oh my God, war crime! And I'm not going to get into this on here. There's someone who's actually much more knowledgeable on Geneva Convention stuff who has done a little video about this specific instance. His name is Ryan Macbeth. I'm going to link to that video in the description. But basically, I'll just say here, no, that is not a war crime. This person is basically a valid target. He is in no way attempting to offer surrender, and you really can't surrender to an FPV drone. It's simply not practical because the Geneva Convention requires it to be practical and safe for the side that's accepting the surrender. It has to be practical for them to accept that surrender. So what this means is when you understand how FPVs work, we are usually not hitting targets right on the front, right on the zero line, because for one thing, that requires us to operate right around our guys, and we don't want to hit them. Anytime that I was flying a mission where our guys were anywhere in the close vicinity of our targets, there were a lot of procedures put in action to make sure that we didn't hit them, hit our own guys, or even overfly them, because I'd rather not fly over our own guys because they're already worried about enemy drones. And we don't want to distract them from the enemy, both on the ground and those enemy drones in the sky, right? So typically what we're doing is we are flying beyond the zero line. We are flying several kilometers, up to about a dozen kilometers in some cases, behind the front line. And we're typically targeting forces that are moving up. They're trying to advance, right? So guys are moving up. They're trying to sometimes relieve maybe an observation post or something. A lot of what the Russians have been doing pretty much since 2023 is they move in very small groups to attract less attention. And they will try to, with a small group, they'll try to get sort of a foothold somewhere like in a tree line. They'll dig in, and then they try to basically build up a presence there. They'll do that whether it's like a little village of houses or a trench network or something like that. So what we're constantly doing is trying to keep them out of those houses or trench networks. But the best way to do that is we're actually going beyond and we're trying to hit the guys that are coming up or guys that are going back for whatever reason. Also, they have to resupply any guys they have at the front, so they'll often use motorcycles or ATVs, for example. So we'll hit the guys that are trying to run them food, ammo, water, whatever. And the reason this is important is that if we fly, let's say, 3 kilometers behind the zero line, so we're on their side of the line now, we're flying there, and we catch a guy out in the open, and that is very rare, at least in my AO is very rare to do that. We did a few times, but more often you see that at night when apparently they don't tell some of their guys we have thermal drones. But if you catch someone out in the open and you're flying up close to him and suddenly, like, he throws his weapon away, he starts crossing himself, he's begging for his life or whatever, I realize that this is a terrifying thing to put yourself in that situation. You know, a lot of the ways you can die in a war like this, and I think this is something that's kept me going through a lot of ways you can die are very unexpected. And on one hand, it can be very jarring when you go out and you know that, okay, now I am in range of enemy FPV drones, or now I'm in range of artillery. It can be jarring to realize that at any moment you'll get almost zero warning and you could just explode. Okay, but that is the reality of it, right? And when you start to train your mind to realize, like, okay, I'm going to go out, I'm going to do my job. If I explode, I explode, right? It is a little bit easier to deal with. I realize that for a person to see an FPV circling them like that and understand that you are most likely about to die or get seriously maimed, that is a terrifying thing. That being said, we cannot just fly off and waste a drone, because you know what happens. That guy goes and picks up his rifle, or maybe if he's having a bad day, like the guy sitting in the field, somebody polices him up, they give him another rifle, and they put him right back into assault. Or what they do is they send the guy to keep doing whatever his job is, and therefore the war machine is still working. Okay, that is the reality of it. And you also have to understand that troops on the front line or even in the rear, they sleep, they shower, they have to use the bathroom, right? Dig a hole in some cases, or outhouse or whatever. They do this in range of artillery and all kinds of weapons, and nobody suggests that they should get a timeout. I had one situation where in our, you could call it a forward operating base, if you will, we had a series of about 5 to 6 ballistic missiles come in probably less than half a kilometer from where we were sleeping. This was not a very protected, but basically if one of these missiles had hit closer to where we were sleeping, it would have just reduced the whole place to sticks, basically just toothpicks, okay? And these came in one after another, spaced out maybe 20 minutes, 15 minutes, something like that. All ended up going to the same target, okay? But, you know, we were just sleeping there. We were eating. We didn't have our weapons on us all the time. Is that not fair, right? Is it unfair? I mean, it's just ridiculous to talk about this, okay? So the whole war crime thing is insane, because one thing you will notice every time this happens, and every account that does this, most of them will deny that they care. I don't care about this conflict, bro. Like Ukraine, Russia, I don't care. They're both worthless to me. They can kill each other as much as they want. But somehow, they only manage to find these videos from the Ukrainian side. You would think just by chance that they would occasionally run across a Russian video, because Russians post these videos all the time, and I am sure that they have caught some unfortunate Ukrainian servicemen out in the open, so those videos definitely exist, and somehow these people never find them. But you know what they also never find? The Russians have put out, with quite a bit of pride, videos of them hunting civilians in Kherson Oblast. If you look on Google, look up Kherson human safari. Human safari is what the Russians call it when they hunt civilians, and they deliberately target civilians. You look at who they're targeting. Their civilian cars are usually elderly people. The reason why it's elderly is that the people who are unable to move tend to be elderly. They would move if they could. Younger people could get out of there and evacuate. These people feel they have nowhere to go and they just don't have the capacity to move. So they are basically targeted by Russian drones on the other side of the Dnipro River. As I said, the Russians nicknamed this Human Safari. They brag about this. They put this on all their Telegram channels. Good friend of the channel, Dylan Burns, actually did some coverage of this himself. And besides those drone killings, the Russians have also repeatedly put out videos of them executing Ukrainian prisoners who surrendered to them. Not through a drone, okay? I mean, they came up on these guys, there was a firefight or whatever, and they captured these guys. They were right there. They can accept that surrender, and they could conduct those prisoners to the rear, which is what you're supposed to do once it's practical. But no, what they've had them do is basically lay down and shoot them. They've shot them standing. They have engaged in all manner of torture. They have killed prisoners they have captured in even worse ways and done unspeakable acts. But you would think that just by chance alone, some of these warrior accounts or warrior ethos accounts, whatever they want to call themselves, you think they would just occasionally run across something like this and say, my God, like that drone video from the Ukrainians looked pretty bad, but this is so much worse. And this is clearly a war crime. You can't take people who surrender to you and summarily execute them. But that doesn't happen. Somehow they always get the Ukrainian drone video. They're always upset at the Ukrainians, upset at the Ukrainian drone crews. And the lines are always the same. They falsely call them war crimes. They talk about how bleak this is, how depressing this is. And I mean, that's not entirely wrong. But they also say stuff like, this is just a poor conscript. He didn't want to be there. No, they wanted to be there. Most Russian soldiers fighting in Ukraine are on contract. They sign up for the contract willingly because they are being offered massive amounts of money, massive bonuses to go fight. We're talking money that they could not hope to see in their hometown in practically an entire working life. Okay, most of these guys have nothing going on for them. They would otherwise just drink themselves to death. Their own families hate them. And again, now if they die and they don't get to spend the bonus money or whatever, their family gets a big payout. Hopefully, most of the time they get a bag of potatoes or something like that. But while the reasons these guys have for joining willingly may be a bit bleak, because many of them just think they're a loser and this is a way to become a hero, but they are still making a choice. And I want to point out two other things. First of all, if you are actually avoiding the draft in Russia, there have been very, very few cases of anyone facing serious punishment for avoiding mobilization or avoiding the draft in Russia, at least in recent years. In fact, when they first announced a partial mobilization after the Kharkiv counteroffensive in 2022, they had basically 700,000 men left the country, and they didn't really make much effort to keep them in. And I understand why Putin did that, and that's an interesting topic to discuss, but this is not the time. So what I want to point out is that the punishments that a conscript would be avoiding are not that severe. It's actually still pretty easy to avoid serving in the Russian army. How do I know that? Because many of the Russian trolls who laughably try to troll me on Twitter are living in Russia and yet not joining up. Or either that or they live in the West, obviously. Most Russian troops are there by choice for money. But here's the thing, even if they were conscripted, hey, you want to know two armies that actually mobilized and had tons of conscripts in them? The Wehrmacht and the Imperial Japanese Army. So those were conscripts. You want to cry for them getting blown to bits? I should hope not. But that brings me to the last point. Now, I realize that if you are not connected to this country or war in any way, or if you are what some of us call the unbombed, it is very easy to see these videos devoid of context, and all you see is a human being terrified in what is the last moments of their life. I get that, okay? If you step back from it all, that is a natural response because we're all afraid of death and we don't like to look death in the face like that. But look at it from my perspective for a moment, because as I alluded to earlier, the Russians have committed unspeakable acts beyond summary executions of Ukrainians that they have captured, and even the ones they keep alive, they have humiliated and tortured, in some cases for years. We know this because every once in a while we get them back in a prisoner exchange. Now, when you see that poor Russian soldier having a bad day on the field there, thinking he's going to take a time out, ask yourself this. Imagine he and his squad or his team or something reached your position somewhere, and in the firefight, you ran out of ammo. Perhaps you had a guy get killed, another person's wounded, and it's just you and one other person. You can't fight these guys off and you can't escape, and you feel compelled to surrender. How do you think that same soldier is going to treat you? Is he going to be magnanimous in victory? Probably not. Assuming they don't just shoot you right there on the spot, they are likely going to humiliate you before shooting you or doing something worse. And on the off chance that they actually take you prisoner, you can expect to be beaten, tortured, and that will continue the entire time you're in captivity. This is something I don't like to talk about a lot because it is rather dark, I understand. But through most of my career here, pretty much from after the first mission in Kherson Oblast, I always made sure I had a grenade on me if I could. Or if there might have been need for grenades, I would have a spare grenade on me. Now, given the fact that my job here has never been to go storming trenches or kicking in doors, I think you can guess what that grenade would be for. Not going to say it because I want to stay monetized, but what I will say is that I was not alone in this. A buddy of mine, he called his grenade the ticket home. And I know that as a foreigner, despite all the intimidation and the threats that they've made against foreigners they've captured, I know that assuming they don't just shoot you outright from the beginning, if they do take you into captivity, there's a good chance they're going to want to keep you for an exchange because you are valuable to the Russian state as a bargaining chip. But the torture and humiliation that foreign POWs have experienced at the hands of the Russians is pretty much identical to what any Ukrainian can expect in captivity. And for me, pretty much from the beginning, I decided I'm not getting captured. Now, that is a good segue because I want to talk now about why certain accounts push these narratives. Now, as I kind of alluded to before, I suspect there is just something going on with this. It's too regular, it's too uniform, but I do know some of the accounts pushing these narratives are actual verified people. The one that I saw posting this video and commenting on it, and the replies were just absolute Hitler convention. That guy is actually a verified, legit former U.S. Army Ranger. And there were quite a few replies on some of these different threads coming from vet bros. And you can just kind of tell in some cases that, yeah, this guy was a real deal. He is a GWAT combat veteran. Not going to get into a pissing contest over GWAT veterans. I'm just going to tell you right now, they've kind of acquired a bad reputation in Ukraine. I've picked up on this over the years, especially since I now end up talking to a lot of people in recruitment. But what I will say is that I really get a strong impression, especially from this last occasion, that these guys seem to think that these FPV pilots are not in any danger. I think they almost think it's like the Predator or Reaper pilots in the War on Terror, where we had people sitting in air-conditioned trailers in Nevada and controlling drones that were flying over Afghanistan. Let me tell you right now that not only is that entirely incorrect when it comes to FPV drones, but more importantly, if you are an FPV pilot, if you are on a crew, you are well within range of all kinds of weaponry. Everything from the glide bombs, the COBs, right down to 82 millimeter mortars, and some people might still get a little bit dangerously close, so there's a danger of AGS-17 automatic grenade launcher, which both sides will kind of use those almost like in an indirect fire role. You can be shot at by tanks. Tanks here often go out and snipe over long ranges, again, like indirect fire. All kinds of tube artillery, 122, 152 millimeter howitzers, 120 millimeter mortars, enemy FPVs, enemy bomber drones. You are in danger of all that. And one reason I was talking about the possibility of getting captured earlier is that even as a drone pilot, much earlier, my first year of service, where I was basically recon, yeah, that was much more likely because, for example, we were pushing in the Kharkiv counteroffensive, and close contact was something that was very likely in some cases. But even as part of an FPV crew, we did have to be on guard for enemy recon teams reaching our position, reaching the area where we were based. And I can't give too much detail on that because of OPSEC reasons. It's still an ongoing front at the moment. But what I will say is that if that scenario unfolded, we would have a very narrow chance of victory or getting out of there alive. Because whatever enemy troops would actually be able to get there and have the capacity to fight, these guys would be very well equipped and very switched on. Anyone else would have died on the way because we are watching at night. And in fact, in our unit, not far from the position where I worked, some enemy infantry did manage to reach some drone operators. And what do you think they did? You think they applied the Geneva Conventions and took them prisoner and conducted them to the rear in a humane fashion? No, they actually executed them. And I believe this was caught on camera by another drone. So once again, you see why I carried that grenade? Because I don't want to leave alone. I want to take someone with me for the ride. So please, if anyone starts ranting about how drone crews are a bunch of cowards hiding underground and hitting guys who are nowhere near them, please inform them that they do not know what they're talking about. My position and other positions of my unit got shelled all the time. Some days could be pretty quiet and nothing landed anywhere near us, and then some days you really had to keep your head down. We had cob bombs land a few hundred meters away, like you can actually feel the shock pretty much through the earth while you're underground. We've had what I suspect were aerial rockets, grad rockets. Some drone dropped a grenade, luckily about 50 meters. I was pretty safe from it, but didn't see the drone coming in. Enemy FPVs hit one of the positions that I would have been working on at the time another crew was there, and actually managed to detonate their ammo storage. It's a miracle that so many people actually survived that. And then if you ignore all of what can happen to you on position, the most vulnerable time is on the way there to do the changeover or coming back. And this is especially true now that the Russians have a lot of fiber optic FPVs. They have thermal as well, and they can cover roads for a pretty long distance. So yeah, you are not safe. In fact, you're actually a high priority target. So if they get a good confirmed location for you, there's a good chance they'll drop a cob on you if they can't get you with FPVs or something else. That's a 3,000 pound bomb. That's about 1,500 kilograms. If they're convinced that they've found your position, you're a drone team, they may very well decide, yes, it's worth it. Scramble a plane, drop the bomb on them. And lastly, this is not aimed at anyone in particular, but occasionally see one of these idiots talking about how they lament the loss of honorable combat. And half the time I think, this person has probably never served in the military. A few times I turn out to be right, but they haven't even served, let alone actually experience combat. And they want to talk about honorable combat. Like, what is that even? If this person was an actual veteran, let's say a GWAT vet or something like that, I'm sorry, did you guys line up the insurgents on one side, you got on the other side, and you just marched towards each other like it was a civil war or something? Did you guys have like standard bearers to mark your positions? Did your officers charge the insurgent positions with their drawn sabers shimmering in the morning sunlight, waving you forward with their pistol in the other hand? I mean, come on. What are you even talking about? I mean, if you were actually a veteran, a combat veteran in the U.S. military, like I said, no pissing contest. I didn't do jack shit in the U.S. military, and I freely admit that. I say be proud of what you did, but don't pretend that you were challenging insurgents or Taliban guys to pistol duels at dawn, okay? Let's not be ridiculous here. I've seen gun camera footage. This actually came up in the midst of one of these conversations about the drone footage. I've seen Apache helicopter gun camera footage where a guy who was basically unarmed and looks like he was praying for mercy got gunned down by the 30 millimeter chain gun, okay? And if you were never in the military at all, please, there's the door. Get out, okay? Because I'm not interested in your opinion. And the reason why is because for me, even if someone was a non-combat veteran, that's still a person who stood up and said to their government, imperfect as it is, I am putting my life in your hands. I am ready to give my life for you. And when I say give my life, you got to understand it's not always about dying, what I'm talking about, okay? Kids join up at 17, 18-year-olds join up. And when they do that, they are giving up a lot of their own freedom and all the other things they could be doing with that time. So if after high school you just slept on mom's couch for a year and then went off to college and partied and drank and everything, if we're talking about military affairs, I am definitely going to listen to the non-combat veteran first. But not if he sees a drone video and starts whining about the loss of honorable combat. Then all bets are off, okay? And same for actual combat veterans if they're going to do the same thing, because I know that you were not so honorable. You didn't fight any duels with those insurgents or the Taliban. And let's face it, the reality of war is you need to win. And a fair fight is the wrong fight. It's not a sport. It's not a game. When I was doing infantry shit here, I found myself on the receiving end of a lot of very long-range weapon systems. And in these cases, we really couldn't do anything about that. And after so many missions like this, my team leader, after a particularly bad outing, came to me and said, yeah, drones. We need to get into drones. That's how I got into it, because I had no practical knowledge about drones when I started out in this war. But like I said near to the beginning, my axiom for this war is minimize your risk, maximize your lethality. You minimize risk because every day you come back and you keep fighting, you are having more of an impact. I guess what you could draw from all of this, the conclusion you could draw from it, is something I learned just even within the first year of this conflict, is that the average person knows literally nothing about war. Like, it doesn't matter if they're a military history enthusiast and they have this obsession with weapons, tactics, whatever. When it comes to this war, those people can say things just as ignorant as someone who has zero interest in the military or war in general. I was just talking to someone earlier this day about how in the U.S. we had this 20-year war going on in Afghanistan. For part of that, we had a war going on in Iraq as well. But if you were a person in the U.S. and you didn't have like a close family member who was in the military, and you didn't work in some business that was closely connected to the military, you could basically live your life and not be affected by the war at all, especially if you didn't watch the news on TV. That war might as well have been on Mars. And that actually, I think, is a major reason for what we call the civilian-military divide that a lot of service members rightly complain about. And so for my people, Americans at least, like, no one really had to learn. And like I said, people just do not understand anything about this war. I can't tell you how many times people would say stuff like, well, how can you tweet if you're on a battlefield? How can you tweet from the front? Let me tell you something. When I was on position, there is still a lot of free time. There's actually a lot of time between our flights, and then there's certain parts of the day where it gets really slow. And there's really not much you can do but tweet. Guys are on their phones all the time there. And as part of a drone crew, we have internet the whole time. We have secure internet. And for me, I think it's just a combination of ADHD and the fact that it's kind of the only social network I use traditionally. If I have secure cell network or if I have Starlink Wi-Fi somewhere, I'm going to tweet. I got stuff to say. But that's just one more example of how people just have no idea what modern state-on-state conflict looks like. And so that's why they see a drone video like that and they go, wow, that is so cowardly, dishonorable, and so terrible that you did this to this poor conscript, when they're typically not a conscript. Is there any way to totally correct this? I think no, just because, as I said, this happens pretty regularly, and myself and a lot of like-minded people, including people with actual experience, will often drop in on these threads because they come in our timeline, and we'll try to correct people. And like I said, a month later, you see people saying the same thing. And I really do suspect there's a little bit of coordination to this, but what can you do about that? Look who owns the site, right? My DMs are full of requests that are nothing but crypto scams. So honestly, if you're still on that hell site, it's really up to you whether you want to try to argue with those people. You can always drop this video. Maybe they'll learn something, but I'm not really confident about people learning things these days. Just call it a general vibe that I get. All right, well, thanks for listening. I hope that you had this on in the background while you do something fulfilling and productive. If you have any questions about the use of FPV drones, by all means, drop them in the comments. I will try to give you the best answer I can based on my training, experience, and what is okay OPSEC-wise. As always, I'd ask you to click like and subscribe, share the video, and if you want to further support my work, go ahead and check the description below for the Patreon link. I'd like to thank all the new patrons who recently signed up. You know who you are. And other than that, stay tuned.